Hi there, and welcome to the Brady Ware Dealership Advisory Series. I'm your facilitator, Becky Livingston from Penn Heel Marketing. Today's topic is how do I establish true adjusted earnings for my dealership and what goes into it? You'll hear insights from Tony Wolf, Faris Syed, and Tom Hearn. So let's jump right in. How do you establish a true adjusted earning for your dealership and what goes into it? We talked about facilities, equipment, and tools in other videos, but what are we talking specifically about here? Tom, let's start with you.
Well, I mean, when we talk about EBITDA, we're talking about earnings, basically what we talked about. In other words, how much net profit are you making in the dealership? Another area where dealers usually, where I find a big problem with dealerships sometimes is what they call ad backs. In other words, the dealer that's selling the dealership says, "Here are things I'm taking out of the dealership that you won't take out as a dealer. So I'm going to add that back into the profitability and say, here's what I should really be making." Well, again, the ad backs can be all sorts of different things, but it's hard to be able to tell a dealer who's buying, saying you won't have the same problems I have. You don't know those things.
Mhm.
So ad backs it could be nebulous and could be a problem when you're talking with a dealer when he's looking to buy, especially after looking at your financial statements and going through it. We talked earlier about facility appraisals. Um, I'm finding in a lot of the deals I get involved in, it doesn't matter if the seller has a appraisal on it or the buyer has an appraisal on it. The real appraisal that counts is the bank appraisal.
Mhm.
And a lot of dealerships, the owners and sellers and buyers need to understand that really it's going to come down to the bank to make the appraisal, and the bank's going to make the appraisal, and that's what we're going to be working on. So that's always important that they understand that. And then FFE and FF furniture, fixtures, equipment, and tools appraisals. You need to find a professional that knows exactly what those things are worth. And obviously, a lot of those things have been depreciated, so you need to have an idea of what the how what the depreciation you've had on this equipment and how to be able to price it properly. And you need to get some professional help when you do that.
And do they just find a professional online? How do they find a professional to help them truly appraise that equipment for what it should be appraised for?
There are some companies that specifically do auto dealers, some that do all different types of companies and kind of specialize in auto dealers
That's great
that
to
will
know.
come in. And the way to do it is to remember to have it, if you are going to have it appraised, the most times it's going to be appraised at fair market value in use. So that kind of takes into some of that depreciation. You're not paying retail value, you are paying kind of what it's worth if you had to go replace it in its current condition.
Mm.
and and a lot of deals, depending on what is in there, that I've done a lot, just go with net book value of what the assets are, because blue sky is so high. It's like, hey, I'm going to pay you. You've gotten the tax advantage of writing off your equipment. I'll pay you your net book value that's on the books.
Great.
The issue you get into there, sometimes a lot of people expense a lot of things and they'll put it on the books. So you get smaller type items, may have never made it onto the fixed asset schedule.
Can you give me an example of that?
A lot of people who expense computers and different office type office type equipment, small things out in the shop, special tools a lot of times get expensed.
Right.
Small jacks and different things for the service department. They don't bother putting 1,000 or stuff that's less than 1,000, sometimes less than 2,000. They just write it off and take it all in one time hit.
I think Tom touched on a couple of things which are very important on once you start adding ad backs and stuff. So we ran into something recently, which I think you guys know that already, but some of the things which you got to keep an eye on FF&E is we had an FF&E appraiser who went in to do for a 7 dealership group upstate, and then as they're doing it, the buyer obviously wants the lowest amount possible. You want to pay for FF&E because that's what the contract reads as negotiated price, right? And the seller wants the highest amount what he wants for FF&E because that's the equipment is maybe 2 years old or 3 years old, and or as has is depreciated in the financial statements. So as we are working through this thing, the appraiser comes in and he's hired by the seller. So the question he proposes, he goes, well, there's 5 different items or 5 different ways I can appraise this. I can do it at a fair market value installed, or I can go through all the way that's the top number, which is fair market value installed, or I can go to the liquidation value of the FF&E, right? That liquidation means that if you want to just have a bunch of dealers within the area come in and look at those items or those parts and everything else was sitting in there and make a bid off the equipment which is sitting inside it. And the difference is about 25% between a fair market value and all the way down here. So the seller is quabbling. He goes, no, I want the fair market value with the installed. And the buyer says, no, I want the liquidation value, right? So somehow we came, because of course he wants to pay 25% less. So the bottom line is I'm trying to make is that it's a very tricky point. Yes, you want to look at the financials and see what he's depreciated his items at, because a seller or a dealer would always want to depreciate it within a 5 or 10 year period. Everything was on there for his own purposes, so at least he doesn't have to. He can take the max advantage of the tax breaks. But when it comes to buying and selling, you want to make sure that the appraiser who's coming in, sometimes the buyer and seller are paying 50-50, which is one of them is paying 20 grand and the other one is paying 20 grand to bring in that appraiser. He's gonna itemize it based on what the fair market value of those items are. That's most of the I think accounting firms, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys look for a fair market value when it comes to FF&E, correct?
It's a fair market value in use. So again, that takes into consideration some, the depreciation of it. But
right. So
tries to give a fair
right.
value of, hey, this has been there 10 years. Here's the value.
So if some of the equipment or most of the equipment is sitting in there and it's depreciated at, let's say, $2 million, the fair market value is coming in at, 3.5, and your liquidation value is around, let's say, $2.5 million. How do you come up to a negotiated number on those items? That's just becomes a item for negotiation. And sometimes deals actually they prolong, or they can even fall through because they're not coming to a meeting of the minds when they're buying this FF&E. So that's something which needs to be addressed right from the start.
But yeah, it needs to be. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that how it's written in the agreement, in your purchase agreement, whatever the language is used, that we want to do a liquidation value, or we want to do a fair market value, or we want to do something which is on a depreciated on your financial statements. So that's an important point for right. These buyers and sellers to look at while they're working on the deals.
No, you're right. It's the current two I'm doing right, that I have currently they specify fair market value in use, and they actually agreed on the person before, during the APA discussion. But you do need to specify, hey, are we doing this at liquidation value, fair market, in use? Are we doing it replacement value? What criteria is the appraiser using? And again, other people just say net book value, and others just look at it like good sky and like goodwill, like blue sky.
Right.
So it's just a negotiated value. Hey, I'll give you 500 grand. I'll give you $2 million. Let's just, again, it's just part of the negotiated value, what's going in. And a lot of people like putting a little bit more into FF&E because you can depreciate that over the 5 years.
Sure.
Right.
The goodwill spread over, such a length of time that,
right.
Hey, I'll pay you more for goodwill, or put more in FF&E so we can write it off. For me and for the dealer, tax wise, it's better for him in goodwill for capital gain rate, but at the end of the day, it's more of a wash for him and a benefit for the buyer. I've been looking at a couple deals, for buyers, and Tom mentioned, add backs, and you start looking at what dealers run through their statements, which can be all over the place. When I look at it as I'm helping a buyer right now, it's just, hey, let's get the revenue. It used to be 2.5% return on sales was good for profit. Now I think it's going to settle when things even get back to whatever normal will be, it's going to settle between 3.5.
Wow.
Currently it's at
Yeah.
6, you know,
Or maybe
because
Wow.
higher.
people are
Maybe
even getting
higher.
above stickers. So the last, end of the year, NADA added it, almost 6%. And this year's even higher. But
Yep,
I just
it
kind
is
of,
higher.
look at, hey, what's the revenue been? If you go in and run this normal at 3.5, here's what you should make. What's a good price for what you're going to make in there? Here's what it should do. And if it's the right
Wow.
location and has all those other things that have been mentioned, it's worth it. As Ferris said, it's what a buyer will pay.
If you look at some of my hedge fund guys out of New York, they're telling when I bring something to them, they say we don't want to look at a financial statement from 2021 or 2020. We
Mm-hmm.
want to look at financial statements from 2018, 2019, because that
Yep.
is the real marketplace.
Yep.
So you have to be careful if you're going to base it on, as Ferris and Tony just said, when you go to try to buy a car right now, you have to pay list price for it. Well,
Yep.
that's highly unusual.
Well, we might go to 2017, 2018 because 19 was really a stinker of a year too. So yeah, that's yep.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's why I like to look almost at more of the revenue, even though some of that, because that's a little more stable. But even recently, again, they're selling less cars, but they're selling them for a lot more. So it stays a little more consistency of that than, as Tom mentioned, the profits are just record profits the last 2 years, and this year will be another.
Oh boy. And so will probably next year. I don't think the supply chain's going to fix itself in the next 10 months. At least from what I'm reading for manufacturing, it's not going to be changing that way.
No.
Thank you for listening, and join us for the next installment of our Brady Ware Dealership Advisory Series.